He's recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
Well, I'm hearing a very robust argument for having no resolutions in front of the House of Representatives from the other side of the aisle. And I believe if you look this up, I've probably voted against more resolutions than anybody on this committee and anybody in Congress. And that's because I read them, though, not because I don't believe they shouldn't exist. I mean, there is a purpose for resolutions. Unless it's concurrent resolution or joint resolution with the Senate and then signed by the president, it doesn't become a law, doesn't have the force of law, yet we bring them up every day. The other side of the aisle has sponsored a lot of resolutions this Congress. So I think all of that discussion, though, about the complaining that this is a resolution is because they don't want to talk about what's in the resolution. And there's some very inconvenient truths in this resolution. And particularly when you contrast it with the President's State of the Union last week. He presented to us, basically a campaign speech, but he presented to us that he couldn't do anything, that there was nothing else he could do. Yet in this resolution, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 7 things here in the whereas clause that he could do tomorrow or today. That he's not doing. So I think it's, we should be measured in the number of resolutions we pass and in the number of post offices we name. But this is a particularly important resolution because we've tried to pass a law that would do something. The Senate won't bring it up. We've passed that here in the House, and they just won't bring it up. So Mr. Vandrew, do you believe that that the president could end the catch and release policy?
Yes, Congressman, I do.
Ms. Jayapal, do you think he could?
Mr. Massie, I've already gone through all the reasons why these things don't work. The fact is that
I wasn't here for that, but could you tell me, could the president end the catch and release policy?
if you're talking about the mandatory detention statutes of the INA, there is no administration, including the Trump administration, that has ever complied with that because no Congress has ever appropriated the extraordinary levels of funding.
Could he reinstate the migrant protection protocols?
The Remain in Mexico program was actually stopped by, thank you.
Could he or could he not?
It was actually in effect, and you know, I wanted to mention this actually before when Mr. Van Drew was talking about the effectiveness of the MPP program. The question here is, was it effective? So from January of 2019...
No, that was not my question. My question is, could he do it?
But I think the question is, why would he do it, Mr. Massey?
So you're saying he can...
Because the January of 2019...
I've got a bunch of questions.
I know, but Mr. Van Drew was given time when he
Again,
was...
I would just ask that the witness and...
Yeah, I want to reclaim my time.
Do not talk over one another.
So it sounds like he could, but you don't think it would be effective. Could he enter into asylum cooperative agreements?
Well, it depends what the agreements say.
So maybe he could. Could he end abuses of parole authority?
Mr. Massey, what you're asking is, could he do things? And what I would like to talk about is what happened when Donald Trump did those things. That is what you all don't want to talk about. Even Migration Protection Program, the Remain in Mexico program, under Donald Trump, over 1.4 million people were encountered at the southern border. And you know how many times Donald Trump put migrants into the Remain in Mexico program? Only 70,000 people were placed. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I'm just saying when you talk about these things that Donald Trump did and say they were so effective, they weren't effective.
Well, let's look at the numbers. You said there were 1.4 million encounters under Trump. How many under Biden?
I don't have that number in front of me, but I would just remind you that that was during COVID. So when Mr. Van Drew talks about how the numbers went down, during COVID, flights were not coming to the United States. People were not traveling around the world. There was a significant reduction in migrants across across the world moving during.
Glad you brought up flights. Should we be paying for flights for illegal immigrants?
Well, I don't know what flights you're paying for, Mr. Massie.
And how many, I asked you about encounters at the border, which you didn't know, which is fine. I don't have these off the top of my head either under Biden, but it is in the resolution how many, looks like 9.3 million. How many have, according to the border control, how many have come into the country under Joe Biden?
Well, I assume you have that number in front of you.
Over 7 million, according to U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Do you dispute that?
What I would like to say is that the numbers, when these harsh policies were instituted under Donald Trump, went up and not down. And as we have taken away the ability for people to have legal pathways to come to the United States, and as the situations around the world have changed, as climate change has increased, as countries have been dealing with their own issues, you have seen an increased flow, which is part of the reason we say, if you want to deal with this, then let's deal with the issues in sending countries.
Is climate change a legitimate asylum claim?
No, it is not.
Is
climate
seeking
change
better
real?
wages a legitimate asylum claim?
Is climate change real?
Yeah, changes all the time.
And do you think that the threats of climate change around the world are real?
I think that you have, I'm not picking on you, but I think that the people who say that it's anthropogenic really have no idea what our contribution to the climate is. And if they did, they could predict what the climate change would be, and they've failed to do
Do you think that
that.
greenhouse gases are helping to create climate change? Do you think it's man-made?
Well, I'm glad we're having a science discussion. I'll go here any day of the week.
I'm just
Because
trying
I
to point
know-
out to you that there are a lot of things that
Because
you all
do
say
you
that
think,
aren't true.
Do you think that crops do better with CO2, more CO2 in the air?
I think that we should make sure that we're helping to use regenerative agriculture and.
Do you want to answer that question that I just asked?
I mean, I'm happy to have that discussion with you, but I think that the issue here is
Let's have it.
let's talk about why people are coming.
What's
to
the
this
ideal
country.
concentration of CO2 for
Mr.
plants?
Massey, I'm not going to have that discussion with you.
But you brought it
Let's-
up and said you'd be happy to have it.
Not in this forum. What I'd like
Okay.
to do is have
Well,
a
then
conversation
don't.
about why
then-
people are coming.
Well, you're
to
the one who
United
brought up
States.
climate change as if it were a legitimate asylum
you-
claim. So I asked you if it's a legitimate asylum claim, and you said it's
It's a legitimate
not.
reason for migration, absolutely.
But is it a legitimate, should we accept illegal immigrants because their climate is changing?
Mr. Massey, if you understood the immigration system, you would know that there are different categories for people to be able to come to the United States to apply. There is an asylum category, there's a refugee category, there is a category for employment, there is a category
I'm
for
not-
being with family, and there are a number of reasons that drive
Which is
people
the,
to come to the
but
United
you,
States.
which one is the category that allows them to break into our country illegally because the climate has changed where they live?
Mr. Massey, I don't think that people are breaking into the country illegally, and I just want to say, I think, looking around the room, that I might be the only person who has actually gone through the legal immigration system. And when people differentiate between legal immigration and illegal immigration, the undertone from your side is that somehow people who are coming illegally are trying to break into the country, that are trying to do something wrong, when in fact it took me 17 years to go through the legal immigration system, and I am not disparaging of people who are trying to come to this country for all the reasons that drive people to come to the United States.
I did notice in your statement that you talked about illegal border crossing, so at least you acknowledge that it's illegal, and you're willing to use the word illegal in characterizing their activity, are you not?
Well, sure, of course.
So it's
Once you-
illegal for them to cross the border.
The act of crossing the border, if you are apprehended within a certain radius of the border, is considered an illegal act. That is correct.
And can you give me some other examples of asylum claims or refugee claims that aren't legitimate? Or is every claim legitimate?
No, there's very specific asylum law, and you have to...
Which ones are not legitimate claims?
You have to meet the standards that are defined by asylum law. And by the way, a refugee is a status that's accorded when you're outside of the country versus an asylum seeker who comes to the border to claim asylum.
If we were
Those
able
are
to
two different
intercept,
categories
okay,
by
if we were
law.
able to intercept everybody who's trying to enter this country illegally, and you acknowledge when they cross that border, that is an illegal act, so they are breaking the law. If we were able to apprehend every single one of them, and they all claim that they're refugees or they're seeking asylum, are there any that you would reject for those claims, and under what reasons?
Well, first of all, it is legal to seek asylum at the border.
Okay.
It is legal
Which ones
to
would
seek
you
asylum.
reject?
It is legal to seek asylum at the border. So not everybody who comes to the border and crosses is immediately engaged in an illegal act. But there are people who are not seeking asylum who come and cross the border, and if they're apprehended within a certain radius of the border, then that's considered.
If they
that's
tell you they're
considered a
seeking
crime.
asylum, would you at least give them a proceeding?
You have to have a proceeding. You
So,
have to go through at least a determination, yes.
so it seems to me like most of them that come across have been trained to say the word asylum. And then at that point, your policy would be to believe that that they should be
You have to determine
considered.
whether or not they have a legitimate asylum claim.
Okay, in that
is international
determination-
human rights law.
In that determination, what would you use to deny them asylum? What are
There
the,
is a very specific process and very specific metrics that you have to meet. One of the challenges and one of the reasons President Biden asked for more asylum officers and more immigration judges is so that people could actually have their claims heard and they could actually go through the process quickly, because right now we don't have enough. And so if you're interested in having people be assessed and their claims be processed quickly, then the best thing to do would be to add immigration judges and asylum officers so that you could actually get those claims heard. And when people are given the determination, they generally leave.
I hope you
so-
feel like I'm giving you enough time.
I do now.
Okay.
Yes.
Should they be, if they're seeking asylum and they commit a crime, should they be detained?
Well, right now, I mean, if there's, it depends on what status they're in. These are technical questions that a lot of it depends on what status they're in.
I feel like they should be detained. Do you support building a wall?
I do not think that a wall is going to solve our problems, no.
Do a majority of your, how would you characterize the position of your party? Does it generally support building a wall or not?
I think the position of our party is we should have comprehensive, humane immigration reform that modernizes the immigration system so that we can have an orderly process for people to be able to be with their families and contribute to our economy.
So not building a wall. Let me just focus on one other small set of questions. I appreciate everybody's indulgence and patience here. Are you aware that when somebody is here illegally, or maybe they say they're seeking asylum or they're a refugee or whatever their claim is, but they're not a citizen, that they are counted in the census and that is used to allocate seats in the House of Representatives? Like the population of people who are not here legally is used to be counted in the census and in the apportionment of representatives.
Yes, every single person in this country is counted.
So even the illegal immigrants are counted.
Every person in this country is counted, and that is according to our Constitution.
Should illegal, I don't think our founding fathers foresaw this situation, and I have sponsored a constitutional amendment to remedy this, but should illegal immigrants be counted for the purposes of apportioning representatives of the House or the Electoral College?
If you're suggesting that people who have undocumented status should not count for the work that they do and the contributions that they make to this country, I would say absolutely I do not agree with that. I think every person should count and is important to be counted. I
Counted
think you
for
need
what,
to.
though? Should they be able to vote?
Well, there used to be places that did allow people to vote in local elections, school board elections and things like that. But
Should they be able to vote in presidential races or in the House, or for representatives here in the House of
I
Representatives?
think the question is, how do we treat the people that pick our foods, are on the front lines of our healthcare crisis, are doing the farm work that we need done, are serving us in numerous ways, are doctors, lawyers, contributors to our economy, and yet are unable to get legal immigration status because Congress and Republicans in Congress over decades have refused to fix the immigration system so that we can just continue to talk about immigrants as if somehow they don't contribute and they're a drain on our economy. The CBO just came out with a study that showed that the unexpected migration into this country contributed $7 trillion to our GDP, $1 trillion more in revenues than was expected. But I never hear anybody on your side ever talk about that. All we hear is about the drain on our economy and how immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, are so terrible. I'd love to hear you talk about the contributions.
The great thing about this committee is I don't have a 5-minute counter. Now, my colleagues may not agree. So what I get to do is ask you the same question again until you answer it or until it becomes painfully obvious that you won't. Should people here who are not citizens be allowed to vote for president or be allowed to vote for U.S. representatives?
I think there are many places that are considering local elections and people being able to weigh in, for example, on school board elections. And I think that that's appropriate.
So let me ask the question again, because I don't have a 5-minute timer. Should people who are not citizens of the United States be able to vote
am not
in the
advocating
president?
for-
Please don't talk over me, and I'll give you the same courtesy. Should people who are not citizens of the United States be allowed to vote in the for president or for members of the House of Representatives?
Are you including legal permanent residents as well as undocumented immigrants?
I'm including, and I would like you in your answer to include asylum seeker, people who say they're seeking asylum, people who have crossed the border illegally and we don't know they're here, and people who claim to be refugees but are not citizens. Should they be allowed to vote in the presidential race or for a race for U.S. House of
I am not at this
Representatives?
point for that, but I do think we should think about how we ensure that people, for example, are legal permanent residents. I was a legal permanent resident for quite some time for a variety of circumstances, even though technically you should be able to become a citizen when you're after 5 years. But I do think that there's a place to think about different categories of people being able to make their voice heard in our democracy, but I'm not advocating for undocumented immigrants to be able to vote in congressional or presidential elections.
Now, let me get to my original question that I'm trying to get to, or where I started, is should that population of people be counted toward the apportionment of representatives? So, for instance, there are probably at least 6 extra representatives for the state of California because of the policy that non-citizens are counted not just in the census, but they're also counted toward apportionment of representatives for the House and also for the Electoral College. There are only 6 representatives in total for the state of Kentucky. So there are more people in the state of California who are not citizens, who are counted for the Electoral College and counted for the apportionment of representatives than there are in the state of Kentucky. Do you think that is fair or something that we should continue doing?
I think that every person deserves to be counted, yes.
But for a presidential vote,
I believe that everybody deserves to be counted for our census, and that is the rules around how our census is determined. I mean, if you want to talk about, we can also get into the Electoral College and how your state has 2 senators, but a giant state like California also has 2 senators. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which we can talk about fairness or or what's perceived as fairness in our electoral system.
Mr. Van Drew, do you think that illegal immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers should be counted toward the apportionment of representatives in this House of Representatives?
No, I don't. And there are those, and quite frankly, in confidence, those that are on the other side of the aisle of me who said that a major reason this is all occurring is because it will shift what happens with the census, which will affect the congressional apportionment, which will affect the Electoral College as well. And my person who told me that, who's a friend, and again, I would never mention his name, said, we are going to get to the point that we're bulletproof. You will never be able to win an election again.
And this was somebody on the other side of the aisle talking to you.
Yes, and you'll never find out who it is.
Well, that's fine.
Man, would they be in trouble.
No, I appreciate that you're not disclosing that person, but you know, this, when I try to find out why do Democrats and Republicans see this so differently? Why is it that we will all with ease vote for this resolution because it's just full of common sense and things that a majority of the Americans support, and then it that's in the whereas clause, and then it resolves things that the president can do that he's not doing. So I look for what is the difference? Why would people from blue states be so adamant that this is not a problem, or that these are not fixes, or that it's not fixable, when in fact it is? And the one thing I keep coming back to is, in the census, not only do we count illegal immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers, but they count toward the Electoral College. And this predominantly helps the blue states. And so they don't even need to get them to vote, although we've heard they would let them vote in some races, maybe not others. That is a magnet. That is a magnet. That is a reason. Now you have a political reason, and I think we're getting to the crux of why the other side is rejecting this resolution. If it doesn't do anything, it should be easy for them to vote for. But the reality is it does something. It puts a fine point on what the president said at the State of the Union, the things that he said which are not true. And it shows that this president could do a lot to fix the border tomorrow, and he's not. And so I appreciate both of your time, and I yield back.